лузі червона калина похилилася. Чогось наша славна Україна зажурилася, а ми тую червону калину підіймемо, а ми нашу славну Україну розвеселимо.
Oh, yeah, it's the Matt Kwazaborski Show calling you live and direct from Arlington, Virginia, where it's kind of cloudy, a little cool, getting a little taste of winter still out there. And today is not a conversation about Philadelphia sports or the sports in general. We're going back to Ukraine because it is a very special week in recent Ukrainian history. And I'm pleased to have our great friend and my partner in our new initiative, Dr. Ibrahim Al-Marashi, calling in from California. But before we introduce him, just want to thank Al Gore for inventing the internet. I'd like to thank Spreaker Platform and, of course, all the loyal listeners around the world. Dr. Ibrahim Al-Marashi, how are you today?
We're doing very good, thank you. How about yourself?
Well, you know, it's a 10-year anniversary of the Euromaidan started here, which I would call the beginning of the Russian aggression. And we're heading up on the 2-year anniversary, unfortunately, the Saturday, the 24th, of what I would call the aggressive expansion of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where it's seeking to destroy the identity of the country in itself. And we're in a very precarious position right now, at least Ukraine is, in terms of waiting for U.S. funding to come through, being held up in the House by MAGA speakers and a small minority of loud Republicans who feel that Ukraine should just crumble, it should cease to exist. And this is spelling a lot of nervousness and anxiety amongst Ukrainians, especially within the country. And that's where we are today, unfortunately. That's what this podcast is about, trying to recognize that, get back into the flow of it, and trying to understand how you see things after 2 years. You and I have not podcasted in a long time, and we were podcasting a lot more about Afghanistan and then into Ukraine. But what is your take now coming into the 2-year anniversary of the aggressive expansion of the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
So here we are 2 years later. If you remember 2 years ago, there was doubts that Russia would invade. And I remember in your podcast how more or less, I was impressed because you more or less anticipated Russia's invasion plan, you know, connecting Crimea to the Russian separatist-backed regions. You anticipated it 2 years later. 2 years ago. I anticipated it because I saw in Putin Saddam Hussein a similar mentality. You know, Saddam's invasion of Kuwait took the world by surprise in 1990. Nobody was expecting it. Mm-hmm. Putin did the same. It's tragic because a good number of Ukrainians did not expect the invasion. They were caught off guard. Some wouldn't even want to pack for fear that if they packed, the invasion might materialize. But here we are, you know, we're not Ukrainians. We spent time in the country. Right. And sometimes this is what we could bring to the country as outsiders, is maybe that distance allowed us to see what would eventually unravel. 2 years later, this is what I'm writing about. And this is also something I anticipated. It was Ukraine fatigue.
Yes.
And again, I know this because there was such a thing as Iraq fatigue. So here we are, and definitely Ukraine fatigue is working to Russia's advantage. It's where you have Republicans not only fatigued, this is the tragic thing, but now changing sides. And you have the world, I think, becoming tired. And this is all that Russia needed, was just to wear out the international community's resolve, mm-hmm. and it would win. Right. For Ukraine to win, it has to liberate every inch of occupied territory. For Russia to win, it just needs to wait out the international community's resolve. And so here we are 2 years later, and Russia It didn't succeed in changing the government. It didn't take Kyiv, but could still come out winning.
Yeah, today is the 22nd of February. I should have started that 2024. And as we sit today, the Ukrainian ability to mount attacks or at least defend cities in terms of artillery is severely depleted. This is allowing Russia not only to push forward. We saw the fall of the town Advika the other day, Advika, however you pronounce that. While it's unfortunately Russia has pummeled it to a wasteland, it's still pushing back the Ukrainians and it's pushing Russian troops closer, not only to Kyiv, mind you, but also closer to the Polish border, right? They're getting closer to the NATO border incrementally. It seems that the Ukrainians still have a chance to defend themselves through the air defense systems. But I was reading a report a little bit before we got on here, unfortunately, that if the U.S. aid has failed in another month, that by the end of March, these air supplies will be severely depleted, and that will allow the Russian Air Force to sort of take over and start, what Air Force campaigns do. You need an Air Force in order to mount a real clear offensive. So this is a very precarious and nervous time for Ukrainians on the ground. And to go back to what we have done, I consider myself, I've lived in Ukraine for periods of time, whether it's a couple of weeks or a couple of months of the time, and you spent time as well with us with our endeavors in Lviv, the Lviv Leadership Academy in 2016, 2017. It's definitely a difference than what's happening now than what was happening back then, because we were doing a program in a country that's at war. And suffice it to say, we have plans to do so again come this summer, and given if the situation and security level allows us to do so. I'm not sure if I don't want to send all hope is lost, but they are very, very reliant on these weapons. And it's not just the U.S. weapons. Europeans have to step up and get these weapons to Ukraine. And that's coming in a lot slower. So this is where we are right now. I just want to give a little bit of an update. And I also read something to where they're anticipating that 510,000 Russian troops are now based in the occupied territories of Ukraine, again, inches closer to not only Kyiv, but to Lviv in the west and to the Polish border. Not sure how accurate those are, but I've seen some verified reports that they do believe that the Russians are again mounting that many troops, and they're able to recruit 30,000 troops per month. That's where the Ukrainians are also having a hard time mobilizing. At least that's what we're hearing, but not necessarily that may not necessarily be the case.
And so this has become a war of attrition.
Yeah.
And one side definitely in an attritional war where it's not about territory. I mean, Russia did take its city very recently, but now when it becomes a war of attrition, it's more or less Russia has the advantage. A war of attrition is not so much about taking territory. The front lines are static. It is about inflicting enough pain on one side until it gives up. And on this level, it seems that the advantage is on the Russian side.
Yeah. And you hit the nail on the head about the fatigue. Combination of factors go in there. Some of them internally, I think a lot of governments, especially in the European Union and in the U.S., where it's like, we're giving all these weapons to Ukrainians, but what about us? What about if Russia comes for us? And I think what has to be reiterated to the general public is that the weapons the United States are providing to Ukraine are not weapons the U.S. would sanction to use in current warfare. These are old stockpiles, much like what the Russians and Ukrainians have been fighting with are old weapon systems and tanks and artillery that were produced in the Soviet times. And the United States, I think the general public has to understand the weapons that we're sending over, we're either going to destroy them, so because they're not, we can't count on their accuracy as much anymore, or give them to the Ukrainians and let them figure it out.
I mean, you remember the MiG-29s? The MiG-29 is a Cold War era, fighter interceptor going up against Russia's, fifth generation aircraft. They'll be lucky if they will, if the F-16s, it's taken this long, 2 years. I mean, by the time the F-16s are integrated, will they make any difference? We'll see. But we're seeing in the long term what is, wearing down. It's become a war of drones. It's a game of drones, if you will. And so despite, the fighter aircraft, it is the drones as well. There's been recent reports now of, the main battle tank didn't make a difference on the ground. We thought it would. So, let's see.
That's sort of where the current position is. And you and I are staunch supporters of Ukraine because also what's lost upon the general public, and Americans tend to take the 30,000 meter overview of everything in the world, right? Talking about, we call it the 30,000 foot, but feet don't always, the metric people don't know what a foot is. So 30,000 meters, look to the view, and they're just saying, hey, we got to end this war. We got to stop sending funding over there with the MAGAs are pushing. And it's like, they don't understand what's going to happen to the people. There's awful reports of what happened in Irpin and Bucha and Liman. And what the Russian occupancy of Ukraine will look like will be absolute terrifying for the local citizens. I think these Americans who have Americans and whoever have this 30,000 meter view is like, oh, well, we'll just cede the territory. They'll freeze it. Ukraine will go and function the way it is, just with lost territories, and the Russians will just kind of keep themselves in the occupied territory. And then in a few years, we'll kick the can down the road. And that's not what's going to happen to the Ukrainian citizens. We all know that, before the invasion in 2024, the further expansion of the invasion, lists were created. The way to terrorize people, camps were created to sort of weed out the true Ukrainian nationalists from people who would just be complacent and would switch sides. And that, to me, is what I think the alarm bells have to start going off now. If what is being reported in terms of the artillery, the lack of it, is really a sense of what could happen if Ukraine does fall.
Yeah, exactly. And that would rearrange, I think, the global order as we know it. Were this to happen, I mean, since 1991 and the collapse of the Soviet Union, I think that we're reaching now kind of a seminal moment where there was a unipolar moment. It's not that we're now, I mean, definitely I would say this would create that kind of tripolar moment. Mm-hmm. The U.S., Russia, and in other words, Russia is back, and of course China as the other pole.
Right. And we're seeing Russia, it's getting its allies in order, or its axis, if you will, not just with China, but more sense with North Korea and Iran providing crazy amounts of missiles, drones, as it will, where the Ukrainians have no one they can count on right now. And it also leaves much to be desired, is like, what is the strength of NATO? What is exactly NATO right now that they don't have a stockpile of missiles like Iran does and North Korea does and just ship them over? Like, what is happening there as well? And there's also some concern on the Polish border right now. That was the way the mechanism where many of the artillery and the weapons were coming in through the Polish border into Ukraine, as well as dignitaries. You can't fly into Ukraine, right? So when the leaders would, see these high-profile people would visit Kyiv, they'd have to go through Poland. And right now, the Polish farmers are mounting a blockade on Ukrainian grain, but there's also reports that Poland is about to ramp up the fact that they have to make these checkpoints or the crossings the more of a national security issue or more of a NATO security. They have to be protected. Whereas before, I do not believe that they were being fully protected because of surveillance. They didn't want the Russians knowing where these weapons and dignitaries were coming in at. And maybe the Russians did know, but they just never really effectively attacked it. So then you have pro-Russian Polish attacking these areas and blowing up the train lines. And that could be an issue as well moving forward. But That's kind of a little of a divergent, but it's the idea. What I was trying to say is that the Russians are able to get their allies to mobilize and give them weapons, and Ukrainians' allies are not stepping up to the point right now, and that's the main concern as we sit here today.
And well, this is the tragic thing that this is a good point to kind of refer to our last podcast, where you're going to offer where you're going to demonstrate your ability to kind of predict how events would unfold. And sure enough, this is everything you're talking about. I hate to see it unfold.
There are some positives. We have to look at some of the positives.
The positives, yeah. I mean,
the positives.
Ukraine survived. Ukraine held out.
Right.
But God, I wonder. I just think of all the people we know. It survived, but I'm wondering if the people we know will ever be the same again.
Yeah, it's a good point. The people and the students that we know, we've met a small fraction, of Ukrainian. When we used to work with the Fund for American Studies, you still work in higher education. We're still talking to our alumni and former students. Some of them we know have gotten out. Some of the guys were not allowed to leave. Some have, but some haven't, or they're not allowed to leave up to the age of like 65, I think. No males are able to cross the border that way. It's really, they're now trying to figure out how they can be effective outside. And, some of the alumni have settled and have new lives, but that they're all thinking about what they can do on the, how they can affect the Ukrainian diaspora in their new nations, places like Berlin, Luxembourg, Zurich, Prague. They're also thinking about ways to make a positive impact, but I think their mindset is probably like, is the curtain coming down on the play, in sense of like,
Yeah. Exactly. Well, that's it. It was a play. It was a drama in the beginning. The world, everyone, there was just so much attention focused on this conflict. And now that is a tragic way to refer to it. This was my first prediction on October 7th. October 7th, 2023. I knew that from that day onwards, Ukraine would be forgotten. And sure enough, of course, it's another tragedy, but the curtains opened on another show.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're referring to the Hamas attack of Israel and southern Israel, where we all know about how horrific that attack was. And that you're right, that pulled, and I think Russia knew that was going to pull the United States' attention away because the Israel-Palestine conflict for Americans are very good with black and white issues, right? We want yes or no, right or wrong, left or right. This has always been a conflict where it was Israel versus Palestine, Jews versus Muslims. There's a distinct difference. With Russia and Ukraine, there isn't that distinct difference in the mindsets of Americans and the West in itself. It's like, well, they speak the same language, don't they? They have the same culture. Like, they're both Christians. They're both Orthodox Christians. Yeah, Ukrainians might speak a different language, but then, Mexicans have a different dialect than mainland Spanish.
The Orthodox Christian, some are Catholic or Uniate Church.
Yeah, no, there is a lot of Muslim. I mean, the Russian Muslim population is something internally that could become an issue for the Russians. But I think there wasn't that distinct black and white for people. And that's what I want to say about what happened on October 7th. That pulls the American attention away. And there's a lot of more American citizens that have been taken hostage, that are still hostages. And there's been, American Palestinians, suffering at the hands of the Israeli forces as well. That's kind of diverting a little bit from where we are. The positives, though, that I see, and I thank you for referring to my podcast, what I said 2 years ago, and I'll try to play that clip, basically saying I thought the invasion of Kyiv happened. They were trying to cut the head off the snake, much like the Americans did with Saddam Hussein. They were able to scatter him out and kind of collapse the country. What the Americans didn't anticipate in Iraq was the civil war, the different sects of Islam. And I think that was like a big issue. The positives, and then basically that Russia would try to cut off access to the sea, and that's where I want to go on our final point, is that Ukraine has had this very successful, almost kamikaze drone-like attacking Russian warships and sinking them in the Black Sea. And recently you haven't seen Odessa being bombed. Odessa was being bombed almost every day. You don't see that as much anymore. The grain imports, or the grain exports, I should say, are up to pre-2022 levels. That is a success. And if they get these long-term missiles coming back, they can still attack parts of Crimea and kind of fend off the Russian occupation of Odessa and the Black Sea, which would be a boon to Ukraine, as it was. If Ukraine loses Odessa and the ports, then it becomes much like a larger Belarus at that point, and that's what Russia is trying to do.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, that's the Black Sea theater. Theater, I'm using in a military term, not in the terms of entertainment. Right. There are some surprises there. So air dominance, air superiority is the term, was never achieved for the Ukrainians. But I mean, naval, at least I wouldn't say the sea superiority, but that was quite a surprise how these drones were able to make a difference. Now, remember, this is also, in that case, that involves another actor we haven't talked about, the element of the war in space. And, all of these drones rely on Starlink in the beginning. And, with SpaceX, since the days of the British East India Company, when have we seen a corporation with that kind of reach to dictate global affairs? I'm talking about SpaceX. And, there were Starlink and Starshield programs, respectively. So when you mention those naval attacks, also remember this depends a lot on satellites in space. Yeah. Which brings us to the most recent, fears. Would Russia secure weaponized space by putting, a weapon there? This was never done during the Cold War. Are we going to witness that in our lifetime?
Right. Yeah, and I think you're referring to the Starlink internet kind of mobile routers, if you will, that the Ukrainians and now the Russians are using. The Russians have purchased thousands of them through third-party countries like the UAE, apparently, and the Russian troops have them in eastern Ukraine. And yes, the drones will rely on the satellite conditions. And there's reports that Russia is trying to create an anti-satellite weapon that would knock out the communications of the Allies, essentially from space. Those are some other topics that we can talk to. We're coming up on it. Had a little issues getting this podcast going tonight. I do appreciate your time. What are you doing this week to commemorate this, somber anniversary in California, Doctor?
This week on February 24th is going to be a Saturday. The local House of Ukraine is organizing a commemoration where we will have Sarah Jacobs, our representative in Congress, come speak to us. We will have a professor from San Diego State University, one of the few political scientists in this country who work on Ukraine, Mikhail, is coming. And then we are also having a astronaut come and visit us. He is Scott Kelly, who was on the space station and who visited Zelensky in Ukraine. That is what we will be doing on Saturday.
Okay. That's amazing that you're going to be able to do that. Congrats to the Ukrainian House. I'm glad to hear that they're back up and running out there in San Diego. Here in Washington, D.C., it'll be pretty much, there's a rally that's going to start on the mall in front of the Lincoln Memorial. We'll have speakers from the Ukrainian side, especially the the ambassador. She will speak, and then we'll do a march. Last year when I did it, we marched to the Russian ambassador's residence, which is different than the embassy, and probably do some protesting there. And that is the plan for the 24th here. It starts around 2:00, the rally, and then the walk will begin around 3:30. So we'll be out there no matter what the weather's supposed to be. It's actually supposed to be pretty nice DC wise, so that will hopefully get more people to come out in support. And I will be surprised to see the how many people are there compared to last year. When we did it in 2023. In 2022, I was not living in this area, so I don't know what it was like then. But, Professor, it's been a wonderful podcast with you. We're going to get this up. We'll try to get my other podcast edited in there, but let's convene hopefully sometime next week to talk about the events and leading up to what our venture could be back inside the country or just outside of it in the summertime. It's been the Matt Kwazaborski Show. Yeah, sounds good. Have a great day. Playing back to Red Vibranium is the song that I was playing by Boombox Andriy Korivnichuk, who was on the streets of Kyiv early in the beginning parts of the invasion. His band will be playing in Washington, D.C. The song is a very strongly patriotic Ukrainian nationalistic song, so we'll have to play that now. Thanks again, Doctor. And here comes Andriy again with his a cappella version.
Ой, у лузі червона калина похилилася, чогось наша славна Україна зажурилася, а ми тую червону калину підіймемо, а ми нашу славну Україну розвеселимо.
Oh yeah, it's been the Matt Kwazaborski Show, calling you live and direct from Roslyn, Virginia, out with my great friend in California, Dr. Ibrahim Al-Marashi. You're getting ready for class, Doctor. Have a wonderful class, and let's be in touch very, very soon.
Sounds good. Stay safe, everyone. Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slavom. Thank you to all the loyal listeners, and thank you to Speaker Platform. And remember to inspire the inspiration. Do not wait for the inspiration to inspire you. Have a great evening, everyone.